Hi there. Welcome to the first lesson of the Research Methods course for the Masters of Philosophy in Social Policy and Development. My name is Anthony Kaziboni. I'll be taking you for this course for the rest of the semester. So in this specific module, it lays the foundation for the entire program. We would like to assess how much you know about methodology, and bearing in mind that you come from different academic backgrounds, whether it be sociology, economics, political science, social work, psychology, public administration, or whatever it is, it's important to have just that base of what it means to have a systematic inquiry. With social policy and development practitioners, we're confronted with society's pressing challenges: unemployment, poverty, inequality, migration, social exclusion, climate change, a host of other problems, healthcare even, and educational related issues. Governments and organizations make decisions every day about how to respond to these issues. However, effective policy cannot be based on assumptions, political ideology, or personal opinion, what you think. It must be informed by credible evidence. Research provides that evidence. It enables us to understand social problems, evaluate policies, identify what works, explain why interventions succeed or fail, and generate knowledge that contribute to more equitable and more just societies. So in this lesson, we will introduce the scientific method, the foundation of empirical social research. We'll explore what research is, what distinguishes scientific inquiry from everyday ways of knowing, and how to develop research questions that can be answered systematically through evidence. So by the end of the lesson, you should be able to define research and the scientific method, explain the characteristics of scientific inquiry, identify stages of scientific methods, and formulate researchable questions relevant to social policy and development. Also important would be, the guiding question: what is research? So people often think of research as simply collecting information. However, not all information gathering is research. Journalists investigate stories, doctors collect patient records, government departments compile administrative statistics, community organizations document local needs. These activities all generate valuable information, but they become research only when they are conducted systematically and for the purposes of answering a clearly defined question or research question. Research may therefore be defined as a systematic, rigorous, and ethical process of generating knowledge through the collection, analysis, and interpretation of empirical evidence. Several words in this definition are particularly important. First is systematic. It follows recognized procedures rather than random or ad hoc approaches. Second is research is rigorous. Researchers carefully design studies to ensure that their findings are credible and trustworthy. Third, research is ethical. Researchers have a responsibility to respect participants, protect confidentiality, minimize harm, and conduct their work honestly and transparently. Finally, research generates knowledge. Its purpose is not merely to collect facts, but to improve our understanding of social phenomena. In social policy and development, these phenomena include issues again such as poverty, unemployment, migration, inequality, social protection, housing, education, healthcare, food security, as well as community development. So when we talk about research and the scientific method, it's important to understand that while the terms are often used interchangeably, they're not exactly the same. Research refers to the broader process of generating knowledge. The scientific method refers to a structured approach for conducting empirical research in a systematic, transparent, and logical manner. Its purpose is to reduce bias, increase reliability, and ensure that conclusions drawn are supported by evidence rather than personal beliefs. Scientific inquiry is characterized by curiosity, skepticism, and openness to alternative explanations. Researchers do not begin by attempting to prove that they are right. Instead, they seek the explanation that is best supported by the available evidence. What is empirical evidence? Science research depends upon empirical evidence. Empirical evidence is information obtained through observation or experience rather than an opinion, intuition, or speculation. Depending on the research question, empirical evidence may include interviews, observations, survey responses, census statistics, policy documents, organizational records, historical archives, photographs, audio recordings, and in some instances, field notes. The form of evidence collected depends entirely on the research question. Good researchers always ask, what evidence is required to answer this question? Then it's the role of theory. Research does not begin with data alone. Researchers approach problems through theoretical perspectives that help them understand reality or social reality. A theory provides a way of explaining why social phenomena occurs. For example, when studying unemployment, one researcher may focus on labor market structures, while another may examine social exclusion or educational inequality. Theory helps researchers identify important concepts, formulate research questions, and interpret findings. Importantly, theory guides research, but it does not determine its conclusions. Evidence always remains central. And then this brings us to the scientific method. Although different research designs vary, most empirical research follows 6 broad stages. Firstly, 1, observation and curiosity. Research begins with curiosity. Researchers observe something in society and ask questions about it. For example, why do some communities experience chronic water shortages? Why do unemployed graduates struggle to find work despite holding university qualifications? These are some of the very urgent issues we have in South Africa. Why do some social programs succeed while others fail? Curiosity is the starting point of scientific inquiry. Reviewing existing knowledge. Before collecting data, researchers investigate what previous studies have discovered. This is known as a literature review. Reviewing the literature enables researchers to understand existing debates, identify theoretical perspectives, and learn from previous studies. This avoids duplicating existing knowledge and also identifying gaps that require further investigation. So research builds upon previous scholarship rather than beginning from scratch. Step 3, developing research questions. The researcher, through the literature review, is able to refine a broad topic into focused research question. A strong, clear question should be, again, clear, specific, answerable using empirical evidence, feasible within time and resources, and relevant to an important social issue. So some studies, particularly quantitative studies, also formulate hypotheses. A hypothesis is a testable prediction about the relationship between two variables. For example, municipalities with high levels of community participation will report high levels of satisfaction with public services. Qualitative studies, however, are less likely to begin with a formal hypothesis. Instead, focus on exploring experiences and meanings. Step number 4, designing the study. Researchers then decide how they will answer the research question. This involves selecting an appropriate research design, for example, surveys, interviews, focus groups, participant observation, case studies, experiments, document analysis, mixed method studies. There is no universally superior method. The appropriate method depends entirely on the nature of the research question. Step 5, collecting and analyzing data. Once research design has been established, researchers collect evidence according to the recognized procedures. The evidence is then analyzed. Analysis involves identifying patterns, relationships, themes, or explanations that help answer the research question. Analysis transforms raw information into meaningful knowledge. And then step 6, drawing conclusions. Finally, researchers interpret their findings. The purpose is not to prove preconceived ideas, but to determine which explanations are best supported by the evidence that was generated and analyzed. Research findings may support existing theories, challenge them, or suggest new explanations. All three outcomes contribute to scientific knowledge. And then we have objectivity and reflexivity. One of the defining characteristics of scientific inquiry is intellectual curiosity. As researchers, we should remain open to findings that contradict our expectations. However, social scientists also recognize that researchers themselves are members of society and elements in their research, and every researcher brings personal experiences, values, and assumptions to the research process. For this reason, contemporary social science places considerable emphasis on reflexivity. Reflexivity involves critically examining how one's background, beliefs, and positions may influence the research process. So rather than pretending to be completely neutral, researchers strive to be transparent about potential influences while maintaining methodological rigor. Rigorous research is therefore characterized not by the absence of values, but by openness, transparency, and critical self-awareness. What makes a research question researchable? Not every interesting question can be investigated scientifically. Research questions should satisfy several criteria. For example, address an important issue, focus on observable or measurable concepts, be answerable using empirical evidence, avoid value judgments, contribute something new to knowledge, and be feasible within the available resources. So some questions to consider. Should governments increase social grants? Although this is an important public debate, it is fundamentally a normative question. It asks what ought to happen rather than what can be investigated empirically. A stronger research question would therefore be, how have recent increases in the social relief distress grant influenced household food security among unemployed youth in Johannesburg? This is a clearly defined intervention. There is a specific population, an observable outcome, and a geographical context. It can therefore be investigated using empirical research methods. Types of research questions, generally fall into 5 broad categories. Descriptive, which seek to describe what is happening. For example, what are the experiences of unemployed graduates entering the labor market? Explanatory questions, which seek to explain why something occurs. For example, why do unemployed graduates struggle to secure employment? There are also exploratory questions, which seek to understand complex social processes. For example, how do young graduates navigate prolonged job searching? And then there are predictive questions as well, which examine whether future outcomes are likely to yield certain outcomes. For example, does participation in a graduate mentorship program increase employment outcomes? There are also evaluative questions, which assess the effectiveness of programs or policies. For example, to what extent has the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative improved labor market participation among youth? Evaluation research is particularly important in social policy and development because governments and development organizations continually seek evidence about whether programs achieve the intended objectives. Research in the age of AI. Increasingly, researchers have access to powerful digital tools, including generative AI tools. These technologies can assist with tasks such as organizing literature, refining questions, summarizing documents, and improving academic writing. However, AI cannot replace scientific reason. Researchers must remain responsible for designing studies, evaluating the evidence, making ethical decisions, and producing original scholarly contributions. Good research depends upon critical thinking, methodological rigor, and sound judgment, qualities that remain fundamentally human. In conclusion, The scientific methods provide a systematic framework for generating trustworthy knowledge about society. It begins with curiosity, proceeds with careful planning and evidence collection, and concludes with interpretations that are grounded in empirical findings rather than personal opinions. So for researchers in social policy and development, the scientific method is more than an academic exercise. It is an essential tool for understanding complex social problems, evaluating public policies, and contributing to evidence-informed decision-making. Although throughout this course, you will explore both qualitative and quantitative approaches to research, you will also learn how to design robust studies, collect and analyze data, and conduct research ethically and responsibly. In the next module, the next lesson, we'll examine qualitative research and overview, introducing the interpretive traditions that seek to understand how people experience and interpret and make meaning of their social worlds. Thank you.